Welcome to This Explainer. If you spend literally any time online these days, you already know it feels like an absolute minefield out there, right? Between the conflicting facts, questionable data, and completely wild claims, just navigating your feed can be exhausting. So consider this your definitive digital survival guide. Today, we're putting on our explorer hats to uncover exactly how online misinformation works, why it spreads like wildfire, and, most importantly, how we can systematically identify and counter it using real data and proven psychology.
Which brings us to a huge question. Why do smart people believe the impossible? It is so easy to assume that falling for misinformation or elaborate online theories is just a matter of gullibility, or maybe a lack of education. But the research tells us that's simply not true. Falling for false narratives is deeply, deeply rooted in human psychology, and it happens to incredibly intelligent people from all walks of life. So to really protect ourselves, we have to understand the hidden mechanics behind these beliefs.
Let's dive into Section 1, Anatomy of a Conspiracy. Before we can start countering false information out in the real world, we kind of need to take a step back and dissect what actually makes up a wild online theory in the first place. According to sociologists and historians, a conspiracy theory isn't just a regular hypothesis. It's a hypothesized plot that typically opposes the mainstream consensus. This means it actively flies in the face of qualified experts who actually evaluate this stuff for a living. And what's really fascinating here is the part about extreme malice. These theories usually construct a super strict black and white world. The alleged plotters aren't just greedy or misguided, they're portrayed as carrying out pure maniacal evil. And crucially, the absolute defining feature of these theories is their stubborn resistance to falsification.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive difference between the messy reality of the world and the flawless logic of internet fiction. Look, real conspiracies absolutely do happen throughout history. Think of massive corporate frauds or political scandals, but real life is messy. Actual covert plans are incredibly difficult to conceal, and they are highly prone to human error. On the flip side, the conspiracy theories you see propagated online imagine plotters who act with near-perfect secrecy and just totally unrealistic competence. They completely dismiss the role of random chance, attributing every single minor detail to some master supervillain plan.
Moving right along to Section 2, the psychology of belief.
If we really want to understand why people fall into these informational black holes, we have to approach the whole topic with empathy, not judgment. Let's examine the psychological traps that catch so many well-meaning people. Historical reviews reveal something deeply important. Evidence suggests that the aversive feelings people experience when they're in crisis, things like fear, uncertainty, and feeling totally out of control, those feelings actually stimulate a powerful motivation to make sense of the situation. This is so vital to understand. People often adopt extreme beliefs not out of ignorance or malice, but from a desperate, deeply human search for meaning and comfort. When the world feels chaotic and scary, a highly structured, albeit totally false narrative can act as a soothing mechanism for the brain.
Political scientist Michael Barkun breaks down this allure into three main appeals. First, these theories appear to make sense out of deeply confusing and random global events. Second, they offer a very appealing simplicity by dividing a highly complex world sharply into the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. But that third point, that is often the strongest hook. They offer a feeling of special, secret knowledge. There is incredibly seductive nature to feeling like you possess hidden truths that the rest of the world is just too blind to see. It transforms the believer into the hero of their own movie.
Once someone is hooked, this fascinating psychological defense mechanism kicks in. Researchers call it cascade logic and epistemic self-insulation. Basically, if you show a believer evidence that completely contradicts their theory, they rarely change their mind. Instead, the lack of supporting evidence, or even direct contradictory evidence, is immediately twisted and viewed as absolute proof of a massive cover-up. The theory just expands to include the fact-checkers as part of the conspiracy. It becomes a completely closed loop, an impenetrable bubble that seals itself off from reality.
Which brings us to Section 3, the critical thinking shield.
So if raw facts just bounce right off this self-sealing bubble, how do we protect ourselves? Well, let's pivot from the problem to the analytical armor we can wear every single day. Just look at the sheer scale of this number, 411,000. Physicist David Robert Grimes did the mathematical modeling on how long it would take for a massive conspiracy to be exposed by a whistleblower. Using data from actual historical cover-ups, he calculated that a plot like faking the moon landing would require the silence of roughly 411,000 people. Mathematically speaking, a secret shared by that many people would inevitably be exposed by an insider in just 3.68 years. This is what critical thinking looks like in action. The larger the alleged cover-up, the more mathematically impossible it becomes to maintain the secret.
And the data strongly supports this logical, analytical approach. Studies have shown that very brief scientific literacy interventions, something as simple as a short video explaining the difference between correlation and causation, significantly reduce belief in faulty reasoning. Teaching simple, foundational analytical thinking is absolutely one of the most effective shields against the spread of misinformation. When you empower someone to critically evaluate how data actually works, it short-circuits the emotional manipulation of a fake news story. But what if we could stop the spread of these false narratives before a person even clicks the link?
That leads perfectly into Section 4, the power of pre-bunking. The crucial concept to understand here is pre-bunking, which researchers also refer to as psychological inoculation. Just like a medical vaccine introduces a tiny, harmless piece of a virus to train your body's immune system, pre-bunking involves informing people in advance about the misleading tactics they're going to encounter online. By explaining exactly how a piece of misinformation might try to trick them, you build up their psychological immune system. When they eventually see that tactic out in the wild, they instantly recognize it and reject it without a second thought.
To actually implement this successfully on massive social media networks, researchers Carlos Diaz-Ruiz and Thomas Nielsen propose a multi-layered approach. On the technical side, platforms can flag shady sources, cut off their monetization, or alter algorithms to slow down the circulation of harmful claims. But the human, rhetorical side is just as critical. This involves authoritative fact-checking, utilizing trusted insider allies to deliver corrections, and, this is key, providing believers with safe spaces or exit ramps so they can abandon a false belief without facing public humiliation.
Now for our final piece, Section 5, Real-World Counter-Strategies.
That idea of an exit ramp is a perfect transition for us. How do you actually sit down and talk to a friend or family member who is currently trapped in one of these epistemic bubbles? Listen, if you go into a conversation using ridicule, aggressively deconstructing their claims, and treating the interaction like a political debate you need to win, you are almost certainly going to fail. Throwing aggressive logic at a deeply entrenched believer just triggers what psychologists call a backfire effect, where they simply double down on their false beliefs to protect their ego. Effective intervention is entirely different. It relies on profound empathy, building mutual understanding, and finding messengers they already trust. You really must speak to their underlying anxiety, not just attack their surface-level facts.
So let's look at how this builds into a highly practical, step-by-step sociological method for staging a compassionate intervention. Step 1, enlist trusted messengers. Find someone they already respect to deliver the message. Step 2, affirm their love of critical thinking. Believers often really pride themselves on doing their own research. So redirect that energy. Say something like, I know you value the truth, so let's analyze this source together. Step 3, demonstrate genuine empathy and open-mindedness to lower their defenses. And Step 4, avoid ridicule at all costs to give them a safe exit ramp. If admitting they were wrong means facing intense shame, they will never, ever do it.
Which brings us to our final, deeply provocative question for you today. When you encounter misinformation online, are you building walls with ridicule, or are you building bridges with empathy? In our complex modern digital landscape, raw facts alone just aren't enough to save us. We need strong critical thinking skills to shield our own minds. We need pre-bunking strategies to protect our wider communities, and we absolutely need profound empathy to reach those who have already fallen down the rabbit hole. Keep this survival guide handy the next time you're scrolling through your feed. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and never stop learning.